For 3 years, his chauffeur had taken the same turn onto Magnolia Avenue, past the same figure huddled under the bus shelter. She was part of the city's furniture, invisible to the man in the backseat studying merger reports, until a rainy Tuesday when his car slowed and he glanced at the reflection in the tinted window. The woman held a small paper cup, her white hair plastered by the rain, and the millionaire felt his heart stop. It was his mother. Alexander Sterling had built a fortune from nothing, but in the process, he lost the one person who believed in him first. His mother, Elena, vanished from his life a decade ago after a bitter argument over his relentless ambitions. He thought she had moved on, perhaps even passed away. But in that rain-streaked window, he saw the truth. She had been here in this city all along. And for years, his chauffeur had been driving him past her, blind to her suffering. How did the woman who once worked 3 jobs to keep him fed end up begging for change on the street he owned? Alexander's journey began in a cramped apartment, where Elena worked nights at a diner, days at a laundromat, and weekends cleaning offices. Every dollar went to his future. She'd pack his lunch with a note, "For my brilliant boy." He was accepted to a prestigious business school, a dream she couldn't possibly afford. So she took out a second mortgage on a house she didn't own, using a predatory loan from a man who saw desperation as an opportunity. The day Alexander left, she hugged him tight and whispered, "Don't look back." He took her at her word. At school, Alexander shed his past. He mastered the language of leverage and acquisition. By 28, he founded Sterling Capital. His strategy was ruthless: identify undervalued family-owned businesses, often struggling under medical debt or inheritance taxes, and absorb them. He became a millionaire by 35. He bought the penthouse overlooking the same city where, unknown to him, his mother was being evicted. The fracture happened during his first major deal. Elena, having lost her job at the diner due to arthritis in her hands, called. She was behind on the loan payments. The interest had ballooned. She was scared. Alexander, in the middle of a negotiation, heard only need. He saw a liability. He wired her $5,000, a sum he could lose in a stock fluctuation without noticing. "This should clear it up, Mom. I'm swamped. We'll talk at Christmas." But Christmas came, and he was in Zurich. The calls became less frequent, then stopped. He told himself she was proud, independent. The truth was simpler: she was ashamed. Elena's descent wasn't a plunge, but a slow, steady leak. The loan shark took her car. The landlord, a corporate entity Alexander's own fund would later invest in, raised the rent 40%. At 67, with no savings and a body worn out by a lifetime of labor, she couldn't compete. She became one of over 146,000 older adults experiencing homelessness, the fastest-growing demographic on the streets. She slept in shelters until her chronic cough marked her as a health risk. Then she moved to the bus stop on Magnolia, a spot she chose because it was well lit and near a church that sometimes served soup. For 3 years, Alexander's world was boardrooms and private clubs. His driver, Marcus, navigated the same route daily. Marcus saw the woman. He sometimes left a granola bar on the wall beside her. He noticed her dignity, how she never made eye contact, how she kept a small, frayed suitcase neatly at her feet. He never connected the frail woman with the confident portrait in his boss's office, the one of a younger Elena holding a graduation photo. The irony was invisible. The system designed to catch people like Elena had holes too wide. Waitlists for senior housing were 5 years long. Her social security check, $983 a month, couldn't touch an average apartment rental of $1,400. She was a statistic in a perfect storm: fixed income, rising rents, no family safety net. Experts call it economic eviction. She called it survival. Alexander's success, meanwhile, was built on a philosophy of forward momentum. The past was a country he had no intention of revisiting. He was engaged to Celeste, a venture capitalist whose world was one of curated perfection. At a charity gala for urban poverty, she made a toast about market-based solutions to societal inefficiencies. Alexander applauded. He had no idea that the most profound inefficiency was beating in his own chest. Discovery in the rain was a seismic rupture. He ordered Marcus to pull over a block away, his hand trembling as he fumbled with the door handle. He stood in the downpour, watching her from across the street. She was thinner than he remembered, her posture defeated. A young man in a suit dropped a coin in her cup without breaking stride. She nodded, a gesture of thanks that seemed to cost her energy. Alexander felt a nausea that had nothing to do with the rich dinner in his stomach. This was his mother. The woman who sang him to sleep, whose hands were always warm, was now a public fixture of pity. He took a step forward, then froze. What would he say? What could he possibly offer that wouldn't sound like a hollow transaction? He retreated to the car, telling Marcus to drive home. That night in his silent penthouse, he did something he hadn't done in years. He searched for her, not through private investigators, but in his own memory. He found an old box in storage. Inside was a birthday card she'd sent 5 years ago to an old address. The return address was a P.O. box that had long since closed. The card read, "I am so proud of the man you've become. Love always, Mom." He had never received it. The next morning, Alexander didn't go to the office. He went to the public library and looked up city shelter records, eviction databases. He used skills honed for billion-dollar acquisitions to trace the trail of a single life. He found the eviction notice, the medical bill for a pneumonia treatment she'd received at a free clinic, the closed P.O. box. Each document was a paper cut. The final record was the most chilling, a police report from 2 winters ago. Elena Sterling had been found unconscious from hypothermia under the very same bus shelter. She was listed as a Jane Doe. She had no identification. The system had erased her. Alexander stood up from the library computer, the room tilting around him. His mother had nearly died, alone and nameless, while he was selecting marble for his yacht. The guilt was a physical weight. He drove back to Magnolia Avenue, but she wasn't there. The space under the bus shelter was empty, just a discarded newspaper and the ghost of her presence. Panic, sharp and primal, seized him. He had found her only to lose her again. Where does a 75-year-old woman with nowhere to go simply disappear to? As he stood there, his phone buzzed. It was Celeste. Her voice was crisp, annoyed. "Alexander, the architect is waiting. We need to finalize the plans for the new beach house. Where are you?" He looked at the empty shelter, then at his phone, the two worlds colliding with silent violence. He ended the call without answering. He had to find her. But as he turned, he noticed a man in a worn coat watching him from the church steps. The man nodded slowly, as if he had been expecting him, and he began to walk away, gesturing for Alexander to follow. This man, it seemed, held the first thread to the truth Alexander was both desperate and terrified to unravel. Alexander followed the stranger into the dim vestibule of St. Ignatius Church, the scent of old wood and floor wax replacing the city's exhaust. The man introduced himself as Leo, a volunteer. "She talks about you," Leo said, his voice low. "Elena, she shows people a faded picture, says her son is a big important man, that he's just very busy." Each word was a knife twist. Leo led him downstairs to a basement room lined with cots. A nun, Sister Agnes, was sorting donated blankets. Her eyes, sharp and weary, scanned Alexander's tailored coat. "Finally decided to come down from the tower, did you?" Sister Agnes became his reluctant guide to a hidden city. She explained that Elena was part of the shelter-resistant, elderly, too proud for the chaos of general shelters, too frail for the streets. She used the bus stop as a daytime anchor, a place she felt was her post. The church let her use a cot in the basement on the coldest nights, but only if a bed was free. "She has a system," Sister Agnes said. "Library until 5, bus stop until 9, then she tries here. She calls it making her rounds." But Elena hadn't made her rounds last night. Sister Agnes's concern was palpable. The recent pneumonia had weakened her. The hypothermia incident 2 winters prior had damaged her lungs. A cough could become a crisis. Alexander's mind raced to the empty shelter. The panic returned sharper. "Where would she go if not here?" he demanded, his CEO voice breaking through. Sister Agnes fixed him with a stare. "The only place left, the emergency room, or the alley behind it." Alexander's phone buzzed again. Celeste. He silenced it. For the first time, a business call felt like an obscene intrusion. He drove to County General, his hands tight on the wheel. In the crowded ER, he was a specter in a $5,000 suit. He approached the triage desk, giving his mother's name. The nurse tapped on a keyboard, her expression neutral. "Are you family?" Alexander said yes, the word feeling both true and fraudulent. The nurse's eyes softened slightly. "She was here. Admitted last night. Breathing trouble. She's on the 3rd floor medical ward." Finding her room was a journey through a different world. The hallway smelled of antiseptic and stale food. He paused at the door, room 312. Through the small window, he saw her. Elena was propped up in bed, dwarfed by the sheets, an oxygen cannula under her nose. Her eyes were closed. She looked smaller than she had on the street, a fragile bird hooked to machines. The furious, independent woman he remembered was gone, replaced by this exhausted shell. He pushed the door open. Sound woke her. Her eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the light. They found him standing awkwardly in the doorway. There was no shock, no outburst, just a long, quiet look of profound sadness. "Alex," she whispered, the nickname from childhood, a ghost in the room. He moved to the bedside, his words failing him. "Mom, She lifted a hand, thin and vain, to stop him. "You found me," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, heavy with a decade of unspoken history. He learned the mechanics of her survival. The social security check went entirely to repaying the old, predatory loan. A man named Rollins came on the first of every month. The interest kept compounding. She showed Alexander a tattered notebook where she tracked the debt. The original $5,000 loan had grown to over $27,000. She'd been paying for 10 years and owed more than she started with. "I didn't want to be a burden," she said, her gaze on the window. "You had your own life to build." But the story had deeper, darker layers. As Alexander sat there, a young doctor came in for rounds. Dr. Amin was reviewing her chart. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, advanced malnutrition, severe arthritis. The doctor assumed Alexander was a newly involved relative. "The social worker will need to speak with you about discharge planning. She cannot return to the streets. She needs assisted living, oxygen at home. Without a stable address and income, Medicaid is a labyrinth. The wait for a subsidized bed is," he shrugged, the gesture encompassing a broken system. Alexander interrupted. "Whatever she needs, put it on my card." He produced a black titanium credit card. Dr. Amin blinked, looking from the card to Alina, then back to Alexander. The pieces clicked. "You're Alexander Sterling." The billionaire's face had been in financial magazines. The doctor's professional demeanor cracked for a second, revealing pure disbelief. "She's been here a week. We had no next of kin." In that moment, Alexander understood the true cost of his neglect. His mother had been a Jane Doe in this very hospital 2 years ago. Now, she was a woman whose billionaire son was a footnote in a magazine, not a contact in her phone. The humiliation she must have endured, keeping his secret to protect his image, was a weight he could barely comprehend. He made arrangements, a private room, the best pulmonary specialist in the city. He told the hospital administrator money was no object. The man was obsequious, eager to please. Alexander felt sick. He was using the very tool he'd prioritized over her wealth to buy a belated absolution. It felt cheap. He returned to her room, determined to bring her home to his home. But when he proposed it, Alina shook her head with a firmness that surprised him. "No, I won't be your charity case in a palace." Her pride, though battered, was intact. "Then let me clear the debt. Let me handle Rollins." Her eyes filled with fear. "You don't understand. He's not a banker. If he knows I have a son with money, he'll never let go. He'll suck you dry too." This was the pivot. The problem wasn't just poverty or illness. It was a predatory threat his money couldn't simply vaporize. It was a man who preyed on the desperate, and Alina was terrified of him. Alexander realized his financial power meant nothing in this shadow economy. He needed a different strategy. He left the hospital with a new mission: find Rollins. He used his network not for a merger, but for a street-level investigation. Within hours, his security consultant had a name: Victor Rollins, a small-time loan shark with a long history of targeting elderly immigrants and fixed-income seniors. He operated out of a check-cashing storefront in a neighborhood Alexander's fund had labeled blighted and ripe for redevelopment. Meanwhile, Celeste had reached a boiling point. She arrived at his penthouse that evening furious. "You missed the meeting with the architects. You're ignoring my calls. What is going on, Alexander? Is this about some bad investment?" He told her the truth. "My mother is in the hospital. She's been homeless. I found her." Celeste's reaction was not sympathy. It was cold calculation. "Homeless? Do you have any idea the reputational risk this poses? If this gets out, it's a story about a heartless billionaire. We need to get her into a facility, quietly, far away. Handle it." Alexander looked at the woman he was supposed to marry. He saw a reflection of his former self, all optics, no heart. "She's my mother, Celeste, not a liability to be managed." The argument that followed was brutal. She accused him of sentimentalism, of jeopardizing everything they'd built. He accused her of moral bankruptcy. When she left, the silence in the penthouse was a verdict. The next day, Alexander went to Roland's storefront. It was a grim place, behind bulletproof glass. He didn't send a lawyer, he went himself. He wanted to look the man in the eye. Victor Rowlands was a bulky man in a tracksuit, his fingers thick with gold rings. He recognized Alexander immediately. "Mr. Sterling, to what do I owe the pleasure? Looking to invest." The smirk was insufferable. "I'm here for Elena Sterling's debt. I'm paying it off today, full amount." Alexander slid a cashier's check across the counter. Rowlands didn't look at it, he chuckled. "See, that's not how this works. That debt is an annuity for me. She's a reliable payer. Why would I cancel a good thing?" Alexander kept his voice even, the voice he used before destroying a competitor. "Name your price, then you leave her alone forever." Rowlands leaned forward, his voice a greasy whisper. "My price? How about a stake in that new waterfront condo project I hear you're financing? A small partnership." Quiet. The audacity was breathtaking. The loan shark wasn't just asking for money. He was demanding a piece of Alexander's legitimate empire, a way to launder his own operations. This was no longer about a debt. It was an attempted shakedown of a billionaire. Alexander retrieved the check. "That's not happening." Rowland's smile vanished. "Then the old lady's problems are just beginning. Hospitals are so accident-prone, and the streets can be very dangerous for a sick woman." It was a direct threat. Alexander had walked in thinking he held all the power. He walked out realizing his mother was in more danger because of him. His wealth had painted a target on her back. He increased security at the hospital, hiring private guards for her floor. He knew this was a temporary fix. He had to remove the threat permanently, but not through his usual methods. He couldn't buy or merge this problem away. He needed leverage. His security team began digging deeper into Rowland's operations, looking for something, anything, to use. Back at the hospital, Elena was improving physically but closing off emotionally. The shame of her situation, now fully exposed to her son, was a wall between them. She spoke little. Alexander would sit for hours, reading financial reports by her bedside, the silence a chasm. One afternoon, as he was leaving, a nurse stopped him. "Mr. Sterling, your mother asked me to give you this." It was a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. In the quiet of his car, he opened it. Inside was a stack of returned letters, all addressed to him at his old college dorm and first apartment. The most recent was from 5 years ago. Each was unopened, marked return to sender or addressee unknown. She had tried to write. She had tried to tell him about the loan, about her struggles, about her pride in him. He had moved on, upward, leaving no forwarding address for her heart. The final letter in the stack wasn't returned. It was a birthday card for his 30th birthday, never sent. It read, "My dearest Alex, I know you're changing the world. I just miss my boy. Love forever, Mom." He broke down. The tears were for the lost years, for the returned letters, for the woman in the hospital bed who missed a boy who no longer existed. It was the first crack in the granite facade of Alexander Sterling. But grief was a luxury he couldn't afford. His phone rang. It was his COO, voice strained. "Alexander, we have a serious problem. The deal with TechVantage, the due diligence uncovered irregularities, major ones. Their CFO is linked to shell companies that look questionable. It could be fraudulent. If we sign tomorrow, we could be on the hook for hundreds of millions in liabilities." It was the biggest deal of his career, a merger that would define his legacy. And it was collapsing at the worst possible moment. He was due at the law firm in 12 hours for the final signing. He needed to be sharp, focused, ruthless. Instead, he was sitting in a hospital parking lot, holding a decade's worth of unread love, with a loan shark threatening his mother and a fiancée who had just walked out. The two worlds, the one he built and the one he abandoned, were now on a collision course. And as he stared at the steering wheel, he knew he had to choose which one to save. But the choice he was about to make would ignite a firestorm he never saw coming, pulling a dangerous enemy out of the shadows and into the light of his boardroom. Alexander didn't go to the law firm. He turned his car around and drove back to the hospital, the unsigned merger documents burning a hole in his briefcase. He called his COO from the parking lot. "Kill the TechVantage deal, now." The shock on the other end of the line was palpable. "Alexander, you can't be serious. The press, the board." "Do it," he said, and hung up. His empire could burn, his mother couldn't. He spent the day at her bedside, finally talking, not as a billionaire to a problem, but as a son to his mother. He told her about the pressure, the loneliness at the top, the hollowness of his success. She listened, her hand resting over his. "I never wanted you to feel guilty, Alex. I just wanted you to be happy. It was the forgiveness he didn't deserve, and it shattered him. But the outside world didn't stop. By evening, the financial news channels were buzzing. Sterling Capital abandons landmark TechVantage merger minutes before signing. The stock of his holding company plummeted 12% in after-hours trading. His phone lit up with furious calls from board members. Celeste, in a calculated move, gave a brief statement to a society blogger. Personal matters have unfortunately clouded Alexander's judgment. The board is evaluating next steps for stability. It was a corporate coup in the making, and she was leading it. Then a new threat emerged. His head of security, Keaton, called, "We've been digging into Rollins. It's worse than we thought. He doesn't just run loans. He's a front for a larger operation, a syndicate that specializes in asset stripping from the vulnerable, and he's connected." Keaton paused. "He's been making regular payments to an offshore account for years. The beneficiary is a shell company, but we traced the incorporation papers. The lawyer who filed them is the same one who represents your former fiancé's family office." The room spun. Celeste, it couldn't be a coincidence. Alexander thought of her coldness, her immediate push to institutionalize his mother, her obsession with reputation. Was it possible she knew about Elena all along, that she saw his mother as a loose thread that could unravel his carefully constructed image? He ordered Keaton to dig deeper, to find a link between Celeste and the loan itself. At the hospital, Elena took a turn. The stress of the day, the latent fear, triggered a severe asthma attack. As she struggled to breathe, surrounded by frantic nurses, she clutched Alexander's arm and gasped a name he hadn't heard in years. "Marty, find Marty." Then she was sedated for treatment. Marty was her younger brother, Alexander's uncle, a man he hadn't seen since he was a boy. The family had fractured long ago over money and resentments. Why would she mention him now? Alexander tasked his team with finding Martin Sterling. They located him in a veteran's home 2 states away, living with early-stage dementia. When Alexander called, the old man's voice was shaky but clear on one point. "Your mother, she called me, must be 8 years ago now. She was desperate. That loan she took for your school." She said a smooth-talking young woman connected her to the lender. Said she was from a charity that helped struggling parents. Described her as polished, blonde, ice cold. "I told her it sounded like a scam, but she was out of options." The description was Celeste to a T. The timeline matched when Celeste, then a junior at her family's foundation, would have been doing outreach. A horrifying picture formed. Celeste, even before she and Alexander were serious, had identified his mother as a vulnerability. She might have even orchestrated the predatory loan, ensuring Elena would be trapped in a cycle of debt and shame, too embarrassed to ever reach out to her successful son. It was a long-game strategy of isolation, making Alexander more dependent on the world she controlled. Confronted with this theory, Keaton's digital forensics team scoured old Foundation records. They found a deleted project file titled Social Capital Leverage Case Study S. It was a cold, analytical report on providing high-risk liquidity to family members of rising entrepreneurs to create social debt obligations. Elena was case study S. The author was C. Thorne, Celeste Thorne. Alexander felt a rage so pure it was calm. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a form of psychological warfare waged over a decade. He had been living with the architect of his mother's suffering. The woman he almost married had, with clinical precision, engineered the very circumstance that broke his mother's spirit. He now faced a two-front war, a corporate coup led by Celeste and her allies on the board, and a physical threat to his mother from Rollins, who was likely acting on Celeste's orders to keep Elena suppressed. He had to move fast. He called an emergency board meeting for the next morning. He knew it was a trap. They would try to vote him out, using his erratic behavior and the failed merger as justification. He prepared his counterattack. He had Keaton compile a dossier on Celeste's manipulation, the loan scheme, and her communications with Rollins. But it was circumstantial. He needed a confession. He visited Elena, who was stable again. He told her everything about Celeste, about the loan's origins, about the board fight. Her eyes, weary from a lifetime of hardship, filled with a fire he hadn't seen in years. "You fight them, Alex. You fight them for every person they've done this to." She reached into her small bag of belongings and pulled out a tiny, ancient flip phone. "I recorded him, Rollins. Every time he came for the money, I recorded him on this," I thought. I thought maybe one day I'd have the courage to go to the police." She handed him the phone. It was a treasure trove of threats, intimidation, and admissions. But the "wait, it gets worse" moment was still coming. As Alexander left the hospital, a black sedan pulled up alongside him. The window rolled down. It was Victor Rowlands, smirking. "Mr. Sterling, heard you had a rough day on the stock market. Pity." Alexander kept walking, his bodyguards moving closer. Rowlands called out, "Your mother's not the only one with secrets, rich boy. What would your fancy board say if they knew the truth about your first big investment? The one that started it all, the money you used to found Sterling Capital. Where do you think it really came from?" A cold dread seeped into Alexander's bones. His seed money, $250,000, had come from an anonymous angel investor he'd met through a networking event. He'd always considered it a lucky break. Rowlands laughed, a harsh sound. "Ask your girlfriend. She facilitated that too. It was her family's money. They've owned you from the start. You were never the builder, Sterling. You were the asset." The revelation was a nuclear blast. His entire identity, his narrative of being a self-made man, was a lie. He was a puppet, and Celeste's family had been pulling the strings, putting him in debt to them financially just as they'd put his mother in debt to their loan shark. His entire empire was built on a foundation of hidden control and manufactured desperation. That night in his penthouse, Alexander stared at the city lights. He had two weapons, his mother's recordings of Rowlands and the incriminating foundation file, but his enemy held the deed to his life's work. The board meeting was in 8 hours. He could expose Celeste's cruelty, but she could expose the fraudulent origin of his wealth, destroying his legacy and possibly facing legal repercussions. It was a mutually assured destruction scenario. He made a decision. He would not play their game of secrets and leverage. He would change the game entirely. At dawn, he emailed the entire board, resigning as CEO effective immediately, but his resignation letter wasn't a surrender. It was a declaration. He attached the file on Celeste's social capital leverage project and a transcript of Rowland's threats. The subject line read, "The true cost of our success." He then called a press conference for 9 a.m., an hour before the board meeting. He didn't tell his PR team. He didn't script a statement. He was going to do the one thing his enemies never expected: tell the whole, ugly, humiliating truth. He would publicly expose the predatory system that targeted his mother, admit his own blindness, and reveal the rot within his own company. It was professional suicide, but it was the only way to break the cycle of control and protect his mother forever. As the sun rose, painting the skyline in hues of orange and gray, Alexander Sterling walked out of his penthouse, not with a briefcase full of defensive presentations, but with a simple flash drive and a lifetime of guilt. He was going to torch his own kingdom to save the woman who built him. But he had no idea that Celeste and her allies were already one step ahead, and the ambush waiting for him at that press conference would be far more brutal than anything he could have imagined. The press conference was set for the plaza in front of Sterling Tower, but when Alexander arrived, he found a scene staged for his humiliation. Celeste stood at the podium, surrounded by board members, her expression one of somber concern. She was already speaking to a bank of cameras. And so, due to Alexander's increasingly erratic behavior and the tragic personal circumstances he is fabricating, the board has unanimously voted to place him on medical leave. "We are deeply concerned for his well-being." She had moved first. She had framed his truth as a delusion. Reporters shouted questions. Alexander pushed through the crowd, ignoring his security team's warnings. He took the steps to the podium 2 at a time. Celeste turned, a flicker of panic in her eyes. He didn't push her aside. He simply took the microphone from the stand. "For 10 years, my mother, Elena Sterling, lived in fear and poverty in this city," he began, his voice clear and steady, carried by a lifetime of addressing rooms. "For 3 of those years, my chauffeur drove me past her as she begged for change on Magnolia Avenue. I did not see her. I was too busy building this." He gestured to the tower behind him. "I was blind, but I was not the only one who chose not to see." He told them everything: the predatory loan, the recorded threats from Victor Rowlands, the deleted foundation file titled Social Capital Leverage. He did not mention the seed money. He would not give Celeste that weapon. He focused on the crime against his mother, a crime he framed as a symptom of a system that preys on the vulnerable. He held up the ancient flip phone. "The evidence is here. The district attorney has a copy, so does the state attorney general's office. The plaza, once buzzing with corporate gossip, fell into a stunned silence. Then a roar. The story was no longer about a billionaire's breakdown. It was about conspiracy, predation, and a son's public penance. Celeste tried to regain the microphone, her face a mask of fury. He's lying, he's trying to distract from his own incompetence. But the narrative had shattered. Cameras swung to her. In that moment, the world saw not a poised executive, but a cornered predator. The fallout was swift and brutal. By noon, the state attorney general announced an investigation into Thorne Family Foundation and its alleged predatory lending practices. By 3 p.m., Victor Rowlands was arrested on charges of extortion, loan sharking, and conspiracy. He would later flip, providing evidence against Celeste in exchange for a reduced sentence. The board, sensing a sinking ship, publicly rescinded their vote and threw Celeste under it, claiming they were misled. Alexander's resignation stood. Sterling Capital's stock tanked another 20%, but he was free. The empire he built was crumbling, but the foundation of his life was finally being repaired. He returned to the hospital. Elena was sitting in a chair by the window, dressed in a new soft robe he'd brought. She was watching the news coverage on a small tablet. She muted it when he entered. "You did it," she said softly. "You told the truth." He knelt beside her chair, taking her hand. "I'm so sorry, Mom, for everything." She placed her other hand on his head, a blessing. "It's over now. We start fresh." It did not return to the penthouse. Alexander sold it, along with the yacht and the beach house plans. He used a portion of the proceeds to buy a modest, single-story home with a garden, accessible for Elena's mobility. He moved her in himself, hanging her few possessions with more care than he'd ever given a Picasso. The first night in the new house, she cooked a simple meal, her hands steady for the first time in years. They ate at a small table, and it was the richest feast of his life. But Alexander's story was not just one of personal redemption. The public confession had unleashed a wave. His mother's face became a symbol. News outlets ran features on the crisis of elder homelessness. Donations poured into shelters like St. Ignatius. State legislators, under public pressure, fast-tracked bills to expand rental assistance for seniors and cap interest rates on small loans. Alexander used his remaining capital and his formidable business acumen for a new purpose. He founded the Elena Initiative, a nonprofit with a simple, radical model. It directly paid off the predatory debts of seniors trapped in cycles of poverty, while simultaneously providing them with housing vouchers and social workers. He hired Sister Agnes as a senior advisor. He funded legal teams to prosecute loan sharks and slumlords. He did not put his name on the letterhead. The work was his mother's legacy, not his. Celeste Thorne was indicted on 12 counts of fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. Her family's foundation was dissolved. At her arraignment, she glared at Alexander across the courtroom, but her power was gone. She was just another defendant in a cheap suit. The system she manipulated had turned on her. Then came the final, surprising detail. A month after the press conference, Alexander received a letter from a law firm. It was regarding the estate of Martin Sterling, his uncle, who had passed away peacefully in the veteran's home. Alexander had only met him once as a child. The letter stated that Martin, a childless bachelor who had lived frugally, had left his entire estate to his niece, Elena. It wasn't a fortune, but it was substantial, nearly $800,000, the result of a lifetime of careful saving and shrewd investing in blue-chip stocks. Elena, when told, was silent for a long time. Then she laughed, a real, full laugh. "All those years, I thought my family had abandoned me, and all along my little brother was saving up to rescue me." She decided to use the money to create a permanent endowment for the Elena Initiative, ensuring it would outlive them both. The poetic justice was perfect. The money that came from the very family she felt estranged from would now be used to save others from the same fate. Alexander found a new rhythm. He worked from a small office at the Initiative, his drive now channeled into a different kind of acquisition, acquiring safety and dignity for those who had lost it. He was often seen in the community, not in a suit, but in simple clothes, listening more than he spoke. He learned to cook. He planted a vegetable garden with his mother. He was, for the first time, present. One evening, a year after the storm, Alexander was driving his mother to a community dinner at the church. He took a different route, avoiding Magnolia Avenue. Elena noticed. She put a hand on his arm. "Turn left up here, Alex, take the old way." He hesitated, then did as she asked. As they approached the bus shelter, he slowed. It was empty, cleaned up with a new bench and a plaque that read, "A reminder to see one another, dedicated by the Alina Initiative." He looked at his mother. She was smiling, a peaceful, resolved smile. "It's just a place now," she said. "It doesn't own me anymore." He pulled over, and they sat for a moment in the quiet car. The amber streetlight glowed, but the reflection in the puddle now showed only a man and his mother together. The ghosts had been laid to rest. Alexander Sterling had climbed the highest mountain of ambition, only to find the air too thin to breathe. He had to descend into the valley of his own failures to discover what real wealth felt like. It wasn't in the portfolio or the penthouse. It was in the weight of his mother's hand on his arm, in the quiet of a garden, in the balance of a ledger that measured lives changed instead of profits made. His greatest fortune was the second chance he almost drove past. And in choosing to stop, he didn't just save his mother. He saved himself, and in doing so, opened a door for thousands of others to walk through. The story of the billionaire and the beggar was over. The story of the son and his mother was just beginning. Alexander Sterling's story is a mirror held up to our own lives, our own distractions. It asks an uncomfortable question: what are we driving past in our own relentless pursuit of more? The statistics tell us his mother was one of over 146,000, but she was never a number. She was a person with a name, a story, and a son who forgot how to see her. In a culture that celebrates the self-made myth, we often forget the people who laid the foundation and the systems that are built to quietly discard them when they are no longer useful. The crisis of elder homelessness isn't a natural disaster. It's a policy choice, a societal blind spot. It's the result of fixed incomes colliding with soaring rents, of healthcare costs devouring savings, and of the slow, silent fraying of family bonds under the pressure of modern life. Alexander's journey from blindness to sight is a parable for our collective responsibility. We build towers of glass and steel, but the true measure of a society is how it treats its most vulnerable in the shadows below. But this story isn't just about tragedy, it's about the transformative power of a single conscious choice. The choice to stop, the choice to look, the choice to turn the car around. Alexander's wealth didn't save his mother, his humility did. His willingness to be shattered by the truth, to trade his kingdom for her dignity, that was the real currency of redemption. And in that redemption, he found a purpose that profits could never match, the purpose of restoration. The Alina Initiative continues its work, a living testament to the idea that the most powerful leverage isn't financial, but moral. It proves that when we intervene with dignity, not pity, we don't just change a life, we change a story. We rewrite the ending from one of despair to one of hope, and in doing so, we heal a small piece of the broken world. So the next time you pass by someone the world has taught you to ignore, remember the woman in the gray shawl and the son in the tinted car. Remember that the distance between a stranger and a loved one is sometimes just a matter of recognition. The miracles we pray for are often already here, waiting in the quiet, overlooked corners of our daily commute, asking only for us to have the courage to look them in the eye. If this story reminded you of the power of a second chance, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell, because we're just getting started on these journeys into the human heart. Until next time.